Welcome back to Clarkston Lighthouse Guidance. My name is Chandler Fleming. I'm the owner and main therapist at Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling.
And I'm Victoria Fleming, and I am owner and therapist at Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling as well. Welcome to the show. Today we've got an interesting topic.
Interesting and mature.
Yes, it is. Do be aware of that. Today we're going to be talking about the fact that pornography hurts. And it is a subject that requires some attention. In fact, we'll actually be doing two shows, one that's a little more global and then one that focuses specifically on the relationship aspects. But as we get into this, first let's define what pornography is. What is pornography?
We can go with the Webster Dictionary, which defines pornography as the depiction of erotic behavior, as in picture or writing, intended to cause sexual excitement. Mm-hmm. But you know, that's one of those classic things that I think everybody is familiar, a lot of people are familiar with the Supreme Court Justice who said, what is pornography? I know it when I see it, but it's hard to define. So it can be a tough thing to define. Probably the definition varies from person to person.
And I appreciate that he said it's tough to define, but people do know it when they see it.
Sure.
Which means that there is some variation in how people would define pornography. But let's look at the history of pornography. Is pornography a new situation?
No, it's not.
No, it's not. There have been caves where they have actually found pictographs, is that what they're called? Hieroglyphs.
Hieroglyphs.
Where there's pornography that's actually on the caves. So cavemen have been found sketching pornography on the walls. It's interesting because historians actually argue, you know, was it for educational purposes? And it may have been. There's some
think it was.
There are some people who argue pornography.
The caveman in me tells me it's not.
But there are people who would argue pornography for educational purposes.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's even listed in.
I want those people educating.
I've seen it in teenage magazines.
I know.
You know, so, and we're going to touch on that. So it's not a new concept. It's not a new concept at all, but it is one that has exploded exponentially with the advent of film and also especially with the internet. And then you've also pointed out not just film and the internet, but what as well?
Well, you know, I mean, it's becoming multidimensional. So virtual reality glasses and actually the pornography, sex toy robots are becoming more and more common and more lifelike.
Right, so in that virtual reality, you and I have talked a little bit that pornography is a lot like the whole gaming world.
Sure.
You know, that it just keeps getting bigger and more expansive, and the ability to experience it is becoming greater. You know, so as we look at it, pornography globally is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Right.
Billion-dollar. They have a hard time being able to quantify the exact amount, but it is important to recognize so big that it's in the billions.
Yeah.
As we look at pornography and its history and in its expansion, we need to look at who is using pornography. And those statistics are pretty big. There are, in this particular poll, 40 million U.S. adults regularly visit internet porn sites.
So that's about 1 in 9. So 1 in 9 Americans are regularly looking at porn. And so with, you know, maybe privacy of their own home, but if we go to the next statistic, it says 20% of men and 13% of women admit to accessing pornography while they're at work.
And I think that's important to notice. 20% of men and 13% of women are admitting accessing porn at work. You know, work has been looking at people using Facebook and checking their email. Well, now we're looking at the impact of pornography. We're looking at 47% of Christians report porn is a significant problem.
Yeah, so they're violating their conscience most frequently.
You know, and then 10% of adults are admitting that it has an addictive effect in their life.
Right. For sure.
And then 1 in 3 of these users are in fact women.
Right, and you know, it's really a silent epidemic. Men are much more willing to talk about, hey, I have a problem, it's interfering in my life, but there's still that double standard there, so women are much less likely to go and get help and admit that it is an issue and it is a problem.
And I think how pornography would be defined with women would be different. You know, the definition did say pictures or writing. I think women have very often used the writing aspect of it, the 50 Shades of Grey aspect of it.
I think it starts there, but with that law of diminishing returns, it may start with reading 50 Shades of Grey and then looking at some images, and before they know it, they're looking at full sexual contact with bondage.
And entering chat rooms, and
so
you know,
it starts small, but it definitely builds, and women also.
So a lot of people using pornography,
Yes.
without a doubt. And so then we want to look at, so why are we saying that pornography hurts? There are probably some people who are watching this show who are even wondering why bother with addressing this topic. Some of you are maybe thinking, if you're not interested, then just don't watch it. Don't go there. So then the question becomes, does it affect just the person who's watching it? Does it affect just that individual? And the research that is being done, is, you know, scientific research being done, would strongly indicate no.
Sure. So it definitely affects more than just the person it watched. Our previous statistic of people watching pornography at work, you know, there's huge estimates of billions and billions of dollars that it's costing people looking at porn at work as opposed to doing their job. And then the relational effects of divorce, and the effects that it has in acts of violence and so forth is rather huge.
And it's interesting, I think we do bring it up in another slide, but the fact that society is being impacted to the point that now 5 states have actually passed legislation that is acknowledging pornography as a health crisis.
Yeah.
You know, that it's impacting business with income, it's impacting families, and it's impacting individuals so significantly that they are looking at, and there are other states that are looking at legislation that is going to more specifically address pornography specifically.
You know, and quite often I think about the issue of smoking, that, you know, a lot of people I talk to, when they first start smoking, they smoke 1 or 2 cigarettes, and their attitude is, I can handle it, I'll only smoke a couple, 1 or 2 are not going to hurt me. And that's sometimes their attitude when it comes to pornography. But as in smoking, it becomes more and more progressive, and there's biological reasons why there's an addiction factor in place. So nobody really plans on becoming that person who gets lung cancer from smoking, and nobody plans on being the person that has pornography negatively affecting their lives.
Absolutely, and it is interesting. Pornography is, they're smart. It's just like marketing in the store, where certain things like the candy at the checkout aisle, you know, at the grocery store, and magazines, they're very smart in how they set it up and how they utilize that draw and to do the next thing,
right.
You know, to look at the next thing. So as we look at who it hurts, let's also look at the fact that pornography, by that clever packaging, is doing it in a way that it does desensitize. And I know that you talk about it from the Coolidge effect. What is the Coolidge effect?
Yeah, the Coolidge effect oftentimes is called the law of diminishing returns. And basically what it shows is that, especially in areas of sexuality, there's a need for different. So sexual arousal with the same model over and over again, even if it's more intense, it shows more detail, tends to not be as arousing as a different picture or a different act. So what it does is, over time, people get bored with the initial stuff and are looking for things different. Okay. So it leads to a lot of strange behaviors, a lot of things that you wouldn't really expect people to look for, and things that seem to be much, much more intense.
And I would think that that law of diminishing returns, that being desensitized, may be able to explain why what was considered softcore porn, or what is considered softcore porn today, was actually considered hardcore porn just 50 years ago.
Right. So, I mean, Playboy magazines today, most people would say, oh, that's kind of softcore. In comparison, it really is. I mean, it's not as graphic, and it doesn't usually show sex acts. So it is much. But, you know, even under the pornography laws, it was considered pornographic in many communities. It was considered, because it showed full nudity, as being pornographic materials. So there definitely is that desensitization as a society.
Right, and I think that's where that 50 Shades of Grey again, just because it's such, I mean, there's been a second movie. How many books are there? I think in the series, I'm not sure, but it 50 years ago would have been behind the black curtain, right. You know, because 50 years ago, people had to go into a video store, they had to go behind the curtain, and it was a secret checking out.
And now we just joke about it. We call it mommy porn.
Yeah.
So, and we call it porn, but there's definitely a desensitization of even in calling it mommy porn.
Right. So, so we need to recognize that what is being accepted now, just 50 years ago, would not have been considered acceptable at all. In this poll, as polls have been done, almost half of adults polled think that violent porn is okay. And if you start looking at that in the law of diminishing returns at that Coolidge effect, then violent to what degree starts becoming a question, and how far does that go? Looking at that as well, particularly in some other countries, there is a link between a demand for a real rape video as the porn consumption, so it's on the rise, and that's a scary statistic.
Right, and it's sad, but it's somewhat ironic to me. In my years of experience, I've been a counselor close to 30 years now. The people that I work with oftentimes talk about the need for real. And when you talk about what flavor of porn they like, many of them are really, really pushing for something real. And even in something as vile and destructive of somebody being abused, they want to have that feeling like it's really going on. Not
actors.
And not just acting.
Okay, so so we do start seeing just that we need to be aware of that slippery slope. Like you said, no one plans on being addicted to cigarettes, so too they don't plan on necessarily being involved in pornography that they never thought they would watch before. So now let's look at how pornography affects children. What are some ways?
Well, I think it's everywhere, and if you think your children don't see porn, most of you are naive about it. People say, I have restrictions and so forth and so on. And unless you really, really have a high level of security in your house and where your kids are, they will probably be exposed to pornography. At a friend's house, at a family member's house, on the internet, on their phone, on their electronic device, it's there. And it hurts because it creates unrealistic physical expectations. People don't really look that way, and that anything that looks a little bit different oftentimes is considered abnormal. I read an interview of an Australian plastic surgeon, and he was reshaping young girls' genitalia because they didn't feel like it looked right. And it was ironic. It was really the mom's fault and the girl's fault that at a young age they experienced porn, saw porn, and felt like they looked wrong. And the mom, also having experienced porn, was taking them to the doctor to have reconstructive surgery. And that's sad.
It is sad.
So there's definitely an unrealistic expectation. And part of that unrealistic expectation is sex. And I've known people who waited a long time, into their 20s, to have sex, and their only experience to sex was pornography. So it wasn't the same thing. It didn't compare. And they really thought pornography sex was real sex. And I've mentioned this in the past with some clients. Some of the questions I get about sex from my clients are pornography driven. And I believe in a free, great sex life, but some of the things that people were believed were unsafe, were not hygienic, and could cause serious illness.
So when we're saying children, we're talking about our own children in all ages, but if they're seeing these enhanced performers and then start thinking that that's what's normal, the age at which girls are wanting to have breast enhancements has lowered significantly, and yet the study of a woman's body is she has not finished growing, particularly in the area of the breast, until as late as early 20s. So she doesn't even know what her body is going to do, and yet the surgeons are showing much younger teenagers that are going in. And so we're looking at these actors in porn who have had enhancements, who are being airbrushed, and then people are watching and expecting that's what they should look like. That's what they're supposed to be.
Right, and even more damaging is the issue that kids are turned on sexually, and it promoted their curiosity at such a young age. So, and they don't have the maturity to know how to handle it. And so when they do explore, they don't have good boundaries in place, and they're not very safe about it. And I have had, kind of related, a couple of clients who faced legal charges at age 13 or 14 because they were going online and looking for, in one case it was a 13-year-old boy who typed in 13-year-old girls naked. And at that age, he didn't really realize that it was a felony. And he was 13. He wanted to see 13-year-olds. So it really, even though it was age appropriate, it was highly illegal, and so it created problems.
Right, absolutely. And that is another way that porn hurts our children, is we are seeing the boys and girls both are sending naked pictures to their boyfriend, to their girlfriend, to their friends, and then those images, even if it's one of those that is supposed to disappear after 10 seconds, it can be screenshot and saved, and then it is considered a pornography, and they can be legally pursued. So not only just our children of all ages, but pornography also affects and hurts men and women. In what ways do you see that?
You know, particularly performance issues, the inability to experience orgasm. Many people who have watched porn from an early age, when they get it as young as into their 20s, are unable to achieve orgasm. And there are definitely physical reasons for that. I touched a little bit about the plastic surgery, that people are as adults are also seeking out plastic surgery to look more like a sexual object, or they don't like how their genitalia is looking. And then the third on the list is low libido, that you would think porn would increase libido, but it really doesn't. And part of that is kind of what I call the work factor. I had a guy who struggled with porn, and I talked about his sex life. He says, you know, I very rarely have sex with my spouse. And he says, it's just too much work. I can go and if I'm tired and look at porn and be done in 15 minutes. You know, she wants me to talk to her 20 minutes before I bring up the subject. So it's just quicker and easier. And that low libido sometimes is a comparison thing, that the excitement of pornography use is far more exciting than normal sexual behavior between two people. And one is the visual stimulation throughout it, and knowing our own bodies and so forth, that can definitely lead to a low libido. And there is some evidence that, a lot of evidence that it does decrease libido just because you're depleting some of those hormones that give you your sex drive. You're overusing it, and then there's a depletion.
And I think it's interesting because it's so subtle. I think that there is a understanding in the culture that porn doesn't hurt anyone, and that it is just a way to satisfy some sexual desires, to perhaps rev up the, you know, a person's sex life or something. But what you're arguing is that it actually reduces that sexual performance within the relationship, and that it actually increases dissatisfaction, whereas once maybe the man thought he was all that, now he doesn't, and vice versa as well for the woman. So it is sad, you know, that instead of porn improving, as maybe is touted to do, it actually hurts the performance in the bedroom. It actually increases a sense of I'm not good enough. It diminishes the person's desire to even want to have relationships with their partner.
And I want to jump in at that point.
Okay.
Because I did have a client one time who he got married at 28 years old, and I asked him why did he get married so late in life, and he said, well, I was really shy, and it was just too hard talking to girls. And I said, how did you overcome that shyness? And he said, you know, by the time I was 26 or 27, I kind of got tired of porn. So I quit looking at porn, and I started to look for a relationship, and that sex drive caused me to be able to go up to a girl and say hello, you know? So it's not just people in married, there's a lot of single men and women who are withdrawing from the relationship scene because of fear of rejection or just overall shyness, and substituting it with something that's artificial and one-dimensional.
That's so it's actually increasing loneliness and isolation rather than promoting a, hey, now I know and I can go out there and do.
Right.
You know, what about the practical issues? I know that was listed on the fact that porn hurts men and women.
You know, the practical issues are just sometimes a matter of time and money. You know, porn is really free, but people still spend a lot of money on it. I actually had a teenager, 19 years old, who spent $1,700 on porn.
Wow.
And so it didn't start there, but as time went by, he wanted more and more and different, and kind of got enticed in. So it became a financial issue, but also just the amount of time that people spend. People, instead of getting sleep, you know, a lot of college kids, yeah, I was really tired. Oh, did you stay up late studying? Well, not really. Oh, did you look at porn last night? Yeah, I stayed up until 2 o'clock in the morning, and then I was tired in the morning and I didn't do as well on my test. So it does interfere with just stealing time, stealing money.
And I do think that's interesting because I think it's the financial impact that businesses have incurred that has created part of the health crisis in the legislation.
Sure.
Is, you know, when it hits in the pocket, when money matters, then sometimes things get attention.
Sure.
The other facet, so it hurts children, it hurts men and women, but it also hurts those who are the performers. It hurts the actors when you start looking at what is required of these individuals, and it really starts enhancing the fact that it's so not real. Is they're being required to shoot up to 15 hours a day. 15 hours a day, and think about the content. There is a very great sense of just being used and discarded.
Right, and it's really, when you read some of the background insiders being interviewed in the porn industry, especially the women actors, it's part of that Coolidge effect, that they're no longer new, fresh, and they get oversaturated in the market. Sure, there are some porn stars that make it a long time, but most of them don't. There's very few that make it for a long period of time. Most of them are used and discarded.
And you say new, fresh. I know that we had talked about the fact that that means at 18,
yes,
a young woman could legally decide, hey, I'm gonna make some fast cash, you know, and become a porn star,
right,
porn worker.
Oh, sure.
And 18, what a young age to be making that kind of decision, and then having those types of images available to millions of people. I mean, we said
right,
40 million people, and I think that was just a U.S. statistic. That's not even a global
right,
statistic.
You know, it's interesting. Tracy Lords wrote a book on it. I can't think of the name of the book. Your comment just reminded me of that. And she actually was underage when she was in the porn industry. She had a fake ID and was much, much younger. And she talked about going into the cafeteria at school and people pulling out the magazines. And then she talked about being a young adult and wanting to take it all back, but she couldn't. It was already out there, and she was pretty saturated in the market. So.
And there are any number of interviews that do deal with those people who leave the industry and how it follows them. You know, hard to get a job when you've been known in a certain
sure,
in a certain light. You know, and then there's the whole element of physical issues. The reality is people just do not want to watch porn that is safe. Safe sex doesn't sell. And so the states that actually did implement some rules on that, the porn industry left those states and they went to the states where there is not legislation because they recognize people don't want to see that. So you've got to look at the whole physical impact with 15 hours, different partners, you're looking at disease, yeah, absolutely, STDs, unwanted pregnancies, and just really the impact on the body.
Right. So I would encourage people, when you look at the issue of porn, to have compassion on that person. You know, they may have gotten into it because they thought it was a great way to have power or money or a great solution or
quick cash, quick money. Yep.
But the reality is most of those people have regrets, and you know, studying that kind of issue is kind of tough because many people who have regrets are not willing to say, yeah, I regret my choice. And there's a lot of evidence in other studies that point to when people have regrets, it takes them a long time to come out and admit that they regret their choice.
You know, and I think it really comes down to, would you want your loved one, would you want your brother, your sister, your best friend to be the one that's the porn star? And the answer would be no. I think, you know, pretty much across the board, most of us would say absolutely not. And yet, for those who are participating in the industry, it is someone's loved one who is doing that. As we look at it, we do want to close up with resources. There are some very good resources out there to take a look at for a lot more information. We have just scratched the surface regarding the impact of pornography on society and on us individually. So please take a look at fightthenewdrug.org. This is a group of people who started seeing the impact and were so moved that they came together, and there's a lot of science to it, a lot of fact. There's personal accounts. There's also endsexualexploitation.org. And with that one, they actually have a white ribbon against pornography awareness Week. Let me say that again. It's a white ribbon against Pornography Awareness Week, and it's going to fall this year, August 31st through November 7th, so for 2017. But take a look at that, and it's just putting an awareness on how it's impacting us. And then also an excellent one, YourBrainOnPorn.com.
And I really like that one because it deals a lot with the physiological effects of pornography and how it reshapes the brain.
And it does. It reshapes the brain. There's some excellent scientific study that shows how the brain is impacted and how the arousal sites are impacted within a person. And so for more information, do check out those resources. So as we said, this was a more serious topic.
Yes, it was.
A much more serious topic, but it is one that needs to be discussed.
Yeah. So thank you so much for watching. And we're going to do a part 2 on this series, just really looking at how pornography affects our relationships. So please check that one also. For more information, please contact us on Facebook at Clarkston Lighthouse Guidance in Facebook.
Yeah,
thank you much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
The views expressed in this show are for general educational purposes only and do not constitute professional advice on any subject matter, nor do they necessarily reflect the views or opinions of its guests or of Independence Television. If mental health assistance is needed, please seek professional licensed treatment.